Hello and welcome to the next Alumni Career Webinar, Leveraging Executive Search for Professional Gain with Ryan George from the class of 2010. I'm Maura Sweeney, Director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar offered exclusively for Holy Cross graduates. We'll be together for an hour today. After the formal presentation, Ryan will take questions from you for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions throughout this presentation by checking out the question function located on your webinar control panel. This presentation is recorded and will be made available to all participants in a few days. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Ryan.
Hello, Crusaders, and thank you so much, Maura, for the kind introduction. I very much appreciate being able to have this platform to speak to you all today. And tell you both a little bit about myself and what it is that I do for work, but also to share some of the behind the scenes of what actually occurs in executive search, because I've been doing it for 5 years and felt that there was a lot that I learned as I've been exposed to this type of network and the work that I do, and realized that most people don't actually know what I do and what folks like me do behind the scenes. So I think this will be a valuable webinar for those that are involved. Before we get going today, I'll quickly share an anecdote with you all. I live in New York. I work in New York as well, and I was walking on the Upper East Side with my wife and my one-year-old daughter, and I am on the corner of 85th and Park Avenue where there's a St. Ignatius of Loyola Church, and I'm walking down the street and I see a bright purple Holy Cross hat about a block away, and I'm with my wife, of course, who's a bit more of an introvert than I am. And I see the hat coming closer, and I can spot a mile away that it's a Holy Cross hat. And as it gets closer, I see that it's Father McFarland, the president from my time at the school. And in that same moment that I recognize it's Father McFarland, I kind of shout out, "Yeah, Holy Cross!" I was so excited. And then my wife just looks at me and she's like, "What is wrong with you? You're so weird." But I explained to her. I said, "Hey, it's a Holy Cross thing. You wouldn't understand." And to that exact point, I'm super excited to be given this webinar because I'm very involved in the alumni community and glad that I can give back in some fashion. So I hope there's some good takeaways here today. So in this webinar, what we're going to cover as a candidate, why you should engage with an executive recruiter. 2, how to get the most out of a relationship with an executive recruiter that you work with. The difference between an active search and a passive search. Tips for re-engaging with the labor market or making a career shift if you find yourself in that type of situation. How to best position yourself as the obvious choice in a highly competitive labor market. And as I mentioned before, what I think the most important aspect is what is actually going on behind the scenes when you are working with an executive recruiter. And I think if you understand all these things, you will best understand if working with an executive recruiter, how do you get the most out of that relationship? Or if you need to go in a different avenue, how to get the most out of those actions. So progressing. A little bit about me. I am, again, my name's Ryan George. I'm of the class of 2010. I graduated with a bachelor's in economics. I was a 4-year member of the baseball team and captain as a senior. My first 5 years professionally after Holy Cross, I was progressed to become a regional sales manager for Cintas, which is the F1000 company based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. I then transitioned from a business-to-business sales career into the world of staffing and executive search. I was part of a firm called Madison Black for about 4 years' time, where I went from just a consultant in executive search to becoming the team's manager, and then was recruited at the end of calendar year 2018 to become the managing partner of LucasGroup's executive search practice here in New York, where I specifically focus on senior level manufacturing operations leadership. So, topic 1, why engage an executive recruiter? The first thing that I'll say is I like to think of myself as one of those key professional people that you want to have in your back pocket. The line of, hey, let me introduce you to my doctor or my lawyer or my financial advisor or this great real estate agent that I work with. I think that an executive recruiter should be one of those individuals that's also in your key professional network, back pocket, if you will, to really expose you beyond the small professional network that you have built for yourself. And even if you think your professional network is quite large, I can would say with some strong confidence that in the grand scheme of things, it's probably a small professional network in comparison to what an executive recruiter would have access to and help leverage you, because that's what an executive recruiter can do for you, is leverage your skills and experience in what I call a niche within a niche market where you have the greatest value as a candidate. And I'll speak to this in later slides, but I'll focus again on that niche within a niche. That is really where the value is as a candidate for yourself, is to operate in these small categories where there is limited other candidates who have the same skill set as yourself, and truly maximize what you bring to the table and leverage your own experience. So looking at current employment data, as of the last data that we have from end of month March, unemployment right now is at 3.8%, historically low, and especially from even when I left Holy Cross and after the financial crisis, unemployment is significantly lower than it has been in the previous few years, currently at 3.8%. So what does that mean when we look at other employment data, such as number of available candidates relative to number of job postings that exist out there in the marketplace? This is a very rough metric, but if you look at this data from Career Builder as of end of month February for all jobs posted versus unemployed candidates that exist in the U.S. economy, there is currently less than one available unemployed candidate for every posted job opportunity that exists there in the United States. So there aren't even enough unemployed Americans to satisfy the demand of job postings that exist there in the marketplace. And especially for individuals like ourselves who are, highly relevant to the marketplace, have a strong skill set, are in specific markets that are in high demand, you can be rest assured that the available talent pool for a job opening sometimes can be as severe as a deficit of greater than 10 to 1 in regards to available candidates that might even be passively looking in the marketplace. So what this all means is this is a great time to be a candidate. As an experienced, skilled candidate in the marketplace, you have no greater value than you do right now, given some of the data that exists. So how do we then leverage it? So I don't need to poll the audience here, but I think I know the answer to this question. How many of you have had a poor experience with a recruiter in the past? And I would feel pretty confident to say that a majority of hands would be raised to say, yeah, I worked with a recruiter in the past. I had what I thought was a good conversation. I never heard back from them. Or I worked with a recruiter one time. They presented my resume. I got a phone interview. It never went anywhere. The recruiter ghosted me. Never really worked out. Didn't really add a lot of value. And what I'll tell you is that is a pretty common story that exists for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, the staffing industry, and the staffing industry I'll define very distinctively from executive search. The staffing industry focuses on professional level recruitment, so those who are in more individual contributor type capacity up through supervisory capacity, where historically the salaries for those candidates are, let's just say, under 100,000, but that's not a firm number. And then distinct to the executive search industry, which is specific for manager level and above recruitment. But the staffing industry in the UK and the US is historically an industry that hires and trains entry-level sales professionals. And as you could probably imagine, this creates a couple different problems. And first and foremost is you're working with individuals who are very early on in their career who lack a true understanding of the general business environment and what it is to work at the next level with candidates. As well, the majority of all searches that are conducted by executive search and staffing firms in the U.S. are done so on a contingency basis. The reason they're done that is in an attempt to minimize the risk on the client. So by design of the arrangement, it can lead to a less than ideal candidate experience. As with most entry-level sales organizations, the annual turnover of these professionals is greater than 33%. So you have a dialogue with an individual earlier in your career, and the odds of them being there even 2 years later are significantly low. So you don't really have a continuity with conversations you have with recruiters. You can't build a continuous relationship. They can't grow as you grow with you. And so oftentimes it's this very herky-jerky, non-value-added dialogue that you have with a recruiter for a one-off opportunity that doesn't really drive value in the long run. And as I mentioned, there is a critical difference between staffing, which is individual contributor level roles, oftentimes more junior in a career, versus executive search, which is manager level and above for experienced candidates with very specific skill sets. So it's key at this point to also understand the incentives and what's happening behind the scenes. So if you're ever engaged with an executive recruiter, it's important for you to know that an executive recruiter only has two avenues to make money. They can either be engaged on a retained or a contained search assignment by their client, meaning that money's been paid up front for the work that the recruiter will do, or they place a candidate for the specific search assignment that they have been assigned by their client. Executive recruiters don't get paid to place candidates in roles that are not assigned to them, and they do not get paid because most searches are done on a contingent basis unless the role is filled. And as an executive recruiter, our fees are determined based upon being able to deliver as closely aligned as possible to the search assignment that's been provided. So what does an executive recruiter actually do? An executive recruiter executive recruitment, I should say, is a senior level sales career. So first and foremost, what a recruiter does is, going back to one of those original slides about we work in a niche within a niche, an executive recruiter builds a network of highly skilled and experienced candidates within a candidate-driven market, meaning there are less candidates available than the number of job orders or search assignments that can be assigned to the recruiter, meaning that the candidate is king. And that's where a really great recruiter will operate, in a candidate-driven market where candidates are deficient relative to the demand. And second, and most importantly, this is second to building the candidate pool, what they do is they build a network of hiring managers who operate in the exact same niche market to the candidates that they source, who hire the same skilled, experienced candidates that they work with. And what they do is they then introduce those candidates and clients regarding specific business critical searches and help them manage the relationship, from cradle to grave, all the way from initial introduction through and beyond a successful placement. So I'm going to define here the differences of searches that exist. And then this is important for you to know as a candidate who's engaging with an executive recruiter, is how are they engaged with the clients that they're representing. So first and foremost, executive search fees, so the fees that recruiters charge the clients, on average is between 25 and 33% of a candidate's first year negotiated total compensation. So salary, bonuses, relocation packages, any other ancillary bonuses or incentive compensation that's provided, the executive recruiter will charge the client a total fee between 25 and 33% of that total remuneration. It can be structured in three ways: a retained search, where 1/3 of the total estimated fee is paid to engage the search to begin with. Then a second third of the fee is paid 30 days after the search has been engaged. And then the final third of the fee will be invoiced and paid once the candidate has successfully been placed in the role. That's a retained search. The second arrangement is called a contained search. The difference between a contained search is that there's still a 1/3 of the total fee paid up front. However, that second third is performance-based, meaning that there's agreed upon performance metrics, whether that be number of candidates that are submitted to the client or number of interviews that have occurred before that second payment term will kick in. And then the final third, again, is paid and invoiced upon the successful placement of the candidate. And then lastly, a contingent search where no upfront fee is charged by the recruiter to the client, and the entirety of the fee is invoiced only upon the successful placement of the candidate. So in that arrangement, the recruiter works for nothing, for free, for their client, in the hopes of securing the placement at the end for 100% of that total fee. And then continuing on, how does that impact the candidate experience? So as a candidate, if you understand how the search assignment is crafted behind the scenes, how does that impact you working with that recruiter? What I'll tell you firsthand is if the search is retained or contained, that often yields a highly consultative candidate experience because the recruiter is getting paid for their services in that arrangement. So thus the recruiter has an incentive to want to make sure that the candidates are prepared, they're fully aware of what the search entails, they will be met with face-to-face, fully vetted, a very white glove service, if you will, with the candidate if the recruiter is engaged in this capacity. However, as I mentioned earlier, most searches, and I don't have a firm metric, but in my own experience, I could tell you that in the grand scheme, 90+%, and it's probably even higher than that, of searches are done on a contingent, are done contingently. This can lead to a less consultative candidate experience because the client, not wanting to pay an upfront fee, is trying to lower their risk, if you will, by paying a fee to a single search firm or a single recruiter. And not the only way, but one of the key ways that thus the recruiter can be successful is by finding as many highly relevant candidates as possible. So it becomes more of a volume game than it does become a quality game for the executive recruiter to ultimately secure the fee for doing the placement. So back to my focus on a great executive search consultant operates in a niche within a niche, as well as for a candidate to leverage the most value that they can in the overall market. They also want to focus their career search in a niche within a niche. I want to introduce everyone to the concept of vertical market specialism because this is a very key area in the world of executive search, and any good recruiter who really is in the weeds in a market will operate in this capacity. So just to begin, I've been a candidate before myself, and of course I'm a recruiter who works in a very specific market. As I mentioned before, I work with senior level manufacturing operations leadership, and even more specific to that, I work with senior level manufacturing operations leadership for the aerospace industry. So I work in this very narrow pool where I can speak to candidates and kind of talk the talk and walk the walk, if you will, and really understand the nuances of a market to then leverage if a candidate is quite good or not. So if you're a candidate and you engage with a recruiter and they tell you that all I do is I work in marketing search or I work in even advertising search, I'll likely tell you that that might be a bit too broad, as just as an example, because you really want to operate in or work with an executive recruiter who will operate in this niche within a niche model. So using the example, and this is relative to the world that I used to recruit for, I used to focus in what's called direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical marketing and advertising only for the greater New York City area. If you look at that hierarchy structure, yes, I worked in marketing. Yes, I worked in advertising. Yes, it was on the client services functions. Yes, it was specific to pharmaceutical, and it was for manager level and above in the specific New York City area. So thus, I could really wrap my arms around a space as a recruiter. And when I spoke to a candidate who was also in that same world, I could introduce them to as many strong possibilities as humanly possible and really talk the talk and walk the walk with them. So the key takeaway here is you want to engage with a recruiter, an executive search consultant who also focuses in the same exact niche within a niche market, the vertical market specialism, if you will, that you yourself as a candidate also operate within, because that's where you'll gain the most leverage. So aligning the incentives with an executive recruiter, what is an executive recruiter incentivized by? They're incentivized by making the placement and satisfying the search demands of the client. And this is oftentimes where there can be a rub, if you will, or a misalignment of incentives with a candidate and an executive recruiter. And I would hope that a good executive recruiter would point you in the right direction and be upfront and honest with candidates if there is a misalignment. Because oftentimes the strongest misalignment is on the second point there, where I say satisfying the search demands of the client. As most searches are contingent, and thus the recruiter only makes a placement and collects a fee if they successfully place a candidate for the search assignment they've been provided, it's in the recruiter's interest to thus only actively engage and really work intensely with candidates who strictly align with the search assignments that have been provided. And that's a key takeaway. Like, you want to make sure that you're on the same exact page and really in that niche within a niche market, that the recruiter that you work with is operating that same exact world that you are as a strong candidate. Because if there's misalignment there, you're only going to be disserved by the recruiter that you're working with, because compared to the rest of the candidate pool that they have access to and will then represent to their client, you won't be positioned as the best candidate in that pool, and you won't be, your profile won't be done justice, if you will. So to that point, what if I find that there's a misalignment between the recruiter that I'm working with and myself? And the first thing I would tell you is find a different executive recruiter. Find someone else who more aligns with your skill set and, possibly most important, believes in you. An executive recruiter is a salesperson. They are selling individual profiles to their client of why they're best aligned to the search assignment been provided. And if your recruiter isn't jazzed up about you as a candidate, find a new one. They're selling you, and they're emphatic on the phone and in person with their client when they're engaged with them. So make sure that there's strong alignment and compatibility on those. And then two, if there's a severe misalignment dependent upon your strength as a candidate and what you're trying to achieve in your next professional goal, you may want to consider an alternative approach, which is to not engage an executive recruiter. That may be your best plan of action, is to, instead of using an executive recruiter who's a third party to the company that you're trying to work for, you may want to go directly to internal recruitment for targeted companies that you want to align with. And as you then are either engaging an executive recruiter and are on the same page with them, or you're going and engaging directly internal recruitment for targeted companies, you want to be crystal clear about what are you looking for. You have to do the mental homework yourself before engaging in an active search. If you're going to engage recruiters and tell them ask them to bring opportunities to the table and start actively interviewing, I urge you as a strong candidate to really do the mental homework to say, what is most important to me? Where do I get the most joy and satisfaction in my current work? What am I striving for? Where do I really bring the most value to the table? Where does this opportunity need to be located? Because if you don't define those things yourself very clearly, do your old school pros and cons list and paint that picture for yourself before you engage someone else, you're only leading to a potential misalignment of bringing strong opportunities to the table. I'll also add in here, there's no such thing as the perfect job, quote unquote. It's about what I call total calculus of what you're looking for. Really define all of those things. I speak to a lot of candidates often who are pretty well kept where they are. They're making good money. They're in the city that they want to be in. But maybe one thing is missing, and they'll tell me, if an opportunity came about that offered me, so much more money, then I would absolutely look at it and take a look. And what I'll tell you is that probably is never going to happen. And two, it's never just about the money whenever individuals are making career moves. So I implore you to really define and map out what are the critical elements of your search if you are ever to engage an internal recruiter or an external recruiter. And then the last part is, after you define all of those things and you start exploring opportunities, especially in today's economic climate, but it's always hard to find good candidates, is you need to run through the scenario that you're going to receive a counteroffer from your current employer. And does that change anything? And hopefully the answer is no, it doesn't change anything, because it's not just about money, it's about the total calculus of what I'm looking for. But as you do that mental homework, I also implore you to take the next step to recognize that another company will fall in love with you, you will like what they have to say, you will get an offer, and you will have to go to your current employer and tell them you're moving on, and you will receive a counteroffer and go through that assignment yourself, because that will help shape your decision making. And then defining here, an active search versus a passive search. In an active search, of course, you become mentally committed to searching for a new role due to a variety of circumstances, whether it be termination or lack of alignment with your current company for what you're trying to achieve in the long run, or a multitude of reasons. Or a passive search, and that you are generally well kept in your current role, but you're open to exploring what's out there. In either case, the most important thing to my previous slide as well is be clear and define what you're looking for. That is the single most important piece of advice I can give you on these slides. And what if I'm making a career shift? What if partnering with an executive search consultant isn't the best thing for me because I'm not in that same niche within a niche, and I'm going to go proactively reach out to internal recruitment partners? I think there's a distinct difference that you should have here, and that is, one, are you making a half shift, as in the example of going from sales to marketing? They both fall under the same general umbrella. My first piece of advice, if you're going to make a half shift, is if you're currently employed, try your hardest, if you can, to try and make that shift in the company that you're currently employed by, because you already have the internal equity, they already know you, you already got the leverage. If there's an opportunity to make those career moves internally within your current employer, I think that's an ideal situation for any candidate to try and maximize, because if they then go to the open market, you'll be constantly tested with, have you done this before? Do you truly have interest? Are we taking too much of a risk versus other candidates that are out there? When it comes to a complete shift, as in going from being a teacher to an HR manager that would require, schooling or certification or things of that nature, I think more traditional avenues of, like I mentioned, schooling or certifications or networking outside of your general realm will be the best schools of thought there. And I can answer questions at the end specific to any specific question that folks have. Here's another thing that I often get asked of, what if I'm re-engaging with the labor market? And that could be for a multitude of reasons, whether it be an illness, taking care of a family member, returning from an absence to start a family, anything of that nature. There's a very active and growing school of thought out there about the term returnship. There's some good, there's some bad, but I just want to bring it to everyone's attention if you've never heard of it before. A returnship is something that was started and a phrase coined by Goldman back in 2008. It's something that many other companies are now taking advantage of. And what it is trying to identify individuals who are trying to make those career pivots for one reason or the other. Obviously, they've got good previous experience, they've done other things, they bring unique perspectives to the table, and they're great candidates, but they haven't been exposed to a different industry or a different department or something like that. And there are a lot of search firms like LucasGroup, LucasGroup does not do this, but other executive search firms out there that try and package and sell these programs to big time employers that are out there. And I name a few here, companies like ReachHire and iRelaunch and Path Forward. These are all search firms that will sell a service of returnships to a large scale organization to hire, 5, 10, 20, sometimes even more people together in a cohort to then re-engage them with top-tier world-class employers who, and the candidates themselves have previous experience, to then expose them to other areas of business that they don't have the previous experience. So that way great companies can get candidates in this nature when they're so hard to find to begin with, and who have the raw skills but not some of the tactile fundamental skills. So as I mentioned, many large-scale organizations have recently implemented these programs, and some of the most notable that I'll highlight here would be Fidelity, Deloitte, Google, of course, but many, many others are doing this actively. So it could just require a quick little search engine search, and you'll see many companies that are actively trying to employ candidates of this nature. There's also online job boards that are specifically for professional women with families who are either looking to re-engage with the labor market or who are actively looking to find opportunities that provide the level of flexibility that they would require. And there are some I highlight here, one called the Mom Project, and as well another one called the Fairy God Boss. But they do exist. There's many different types of tools out there to assist. And then, what if I'm hitting a brick wall in my search? I'm a candidate out there. I've engaged with an executive recruiter. I've engaged with internal recruiters at target companies I want to work for, and I'm really not getting anywhere. What school of advice would I provide people? First and foremost is in 2019, we live in a unprecedented time of connectivity, and technology is your friend. On LinkedIn specifically, the way that the algorithm works on LinkedIn at this current moment is it rewards the following pieces of content the most, thus amplifying your view on the platform. First is live video streaming. So if you can post a live video where you could do a little introduction of yourself or speak about a topic that you're highly knowledgeable on or something of that nature. The algorithm rewards live video content the most. The second that it rewards is just posted video content. So I've recorded videos where I talk about jobs or I talk about topics and then post it with commentary. That gains a lot of traction and amplification of your voice on the network. And then the third thing is engaging with active commentary on content that already exists on the platform will also help amplify your voice. But the video piece is huge, and I implore you to use it if you feel like you could have advantage in a career search. There's also a strategy out there that Gary Vaynerchuk discusses. He's a very loud, inspirational business guy that you'll see on that platform quite often, but he talks about a $1.80 strategy. And what that means specifically is leaving your quote unquote 2 cents on 90 pieces of content every week. So 90 times 2 cents, obviously $1.80, where you would help amplify your voice as a thought leader in your niche within a niche market by engaging with content that is relevant to the niche market that you operate in. So driving people to view your profile. If you're hitting a brick wall as well, I would implore you to suggest in-person networking events. And meetup.com is a group, is a platform right now that allows other like-minded individuals to find meetup groups that align with their ambitions. So I would take a look at that. And it's very easy to set up, and it's free to engage with the platform and see what's out there. Also, this is a bit more of a sales-oriented thing, but I would implore you to look at it beyond the world of sales, and that's assembling a brag book. Take your best collection of well-dones, pat on the backs, successful project rollouts, key accomplishments, time that you performed well in a contest, things where you've been given public notoriety or were published or things of that nature. Bring that together in a true physical or digital format to share with individuals to bring your story to life. So many times, I speak to candidates and they say, oh, I applied to 100 jobs on LinkedIn and 100 more on Indeed and 100 more on Career Builder, and I never heard anything back. And, it's a blessing that we're so connected in 2019, and technology is such a tool we can use. But sitting as someone who's in talent, what I will tell you is when I post a job for a vice president of manufacturing, I will get 500, 600 applications for that job, and the quality of the people that I receive in that is very sparse. So out of 500 plus applications that I get on a LinkedIn job posting, I get people all the way from, people who are, and no, I'm not trying to say anything against this group of individuals, but people who are, shopping cart attendants at Stop and Shop are applying to VP of manufacturing roles on LinkedIn because you can just apply with a click of a button. So if the more that you can bring your story to light beyond just applying and having it go into the black hole of online job posts, I implore you to do that, because that's going to drive a lot of success for yourself. And then the last piece I'll talk about here, only for a brief moment, because we could talk about this for hours, but ageism. I speak to a lot of candidates who are later on in their career who have excellent experience, who just feel like they're hitting a brick wall time and time again, and they're getting rejected because they're not a quote unquote a culture fit, or they're overqualified, quote unquote, or umpty-ninth other reasons why they get rejected. I just implore you that if you're sitting there today on this call and you yourself are a hiring manager, I challenge you to challenge your own unconscious bias and help influence others around you about their own unconscious bias, because this is the single biggest area of discrimination that exists in the workplace by a long shot. I couldn't even begin to tell you the number of Fortune 1000 companies that I speak to who will tell me directly, I need someone under the age of X for this role because they just won't line up with my culture. It is so blatant and so rampant across all industries, even with the ones who are the ones preaching diversity and inclusiveness. I just implore you as a hiring manager, if you're in that position right now, to challenge your unconscious bias and challenge the other hiring authorities in your company on their unconscious bias, because it's very bad. And I'll be happy to speak about that at length on a different dialogue if you'd like. And then in closing here, how to become the obvious choice. As we talked about that brag book and bringing the examples of your experience to life, I see a lot of resumes that are full of a lot of words, but they lack a lot of meat. And what I mean by that is they don't paint a picture of how they've driven performance in their company. People hire people for the most part in their companies to do one of two things: to make them money or to save them money. And you need to clearly draw that out for people on how you've done that successfully in the past, because the best predictor of the future is past performance. And the more that you can bring that to light using what we call the STAR method is your keys to success. And then last, this is my last slide here, how to find the executive recruiter with your goals. Very simply, if you don't know what a Boolean search is, I implore you to look it up on Google. Boolean search is a stringing together of words to find people that best align. It's how SEO is done behind the scenes. But do a Boolean search to find executive search and the terms that align with your niche within a niche market. Ask for referrals. I implore you as well, openly ask your network on LinkedIn, hey, I'm looking to be in this space. Name a recruiter that works really well in the space, and I promise you that you'll get some good recommendations. And then lastly, make sure that recruiters, internal or executive search, can find you. Meaning, do you have the keywords on your LinkedIn profile to be found that are specific to the area where you drive the most value as a candidate and are looking to achieve your career towards? Because without that, in a world of connectivity, if you don't make yourself drawn out of the search string that all recruiters are doing out there, then you're just going to get lost in the shuffle. So I implore you to reverse engineer that search for yourself. So that's 40 minutes on the nose. I hope you've taken some value from this presentation here today, Crusaders, and I am open to answering any questions that are out there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ryan. You really are a wealth of information. And I should have said at the beginning that I've had the pleasure to partner with Ryan on a number of different opportunities as of, Ryan volunteering his time with Holy Cross over the years. So I'm, again, incredibly grateful for everything you do for the Cross. I do have a number of questions that have come in, both from the registration initially and over the course of your conversation. The first thing that I'll ask, because it's most relevant to the recent slide you mentioned about ageism, is what advice do you have for those of us in our 60s who still want to work full-time but are facing that hidden age discrimination issue? Do you have any tips for how to get around that problem?
So from an execution standpoint, one of the things that I would say would be, like, when you submit yourself for a role and you provide the brag book for your accomplishments, make sure that you're not allowing yourself to be discriminated against by, such as, remove the year that you graduated from Holy Cross or graduate school, or you only need to include, honestly, the most relevant experience to the role that you're going for. So if you were a sales representative back in 1977, why don't you just kind of cut things off and really only provide your relevant professional experience from 1995 and beyond, if that as an example. So that's one thing that I would suggest. The other thing that I would suggest is most of the ageism it all starts and ends right at that resume review, because, like, if I'm a hiring authority and I get a stack of resumes, or they're sitting in a candidate review website that I need to look through, I'm just quickly clicking through those things, and I'll kind of quickly lift, the first 5 or 10, the most 5 or 10 relevant out of a pool of, 100 or more that exists. So just don't allow yourself to get screened out by the fact that someone will see it and then make an assumption to say, oh, this person's overqualified, or they won't like working here, they've got far too much experience, or even they're going to be too expensive for the role that I'm looking to hire someone on at. Like, these are, again, all the biases that a hiring manager brings to the table. So just try and think of it as a candidate from that lens. But the other thing I would implore you to do is to, look at that brag book and maybe assemble all of your highly relevant experience that best aligns to what they're looking for. And then if you see a job posting that you're interested in, try and figure out who are the hiring authorities for that job posting, and try and make the email or phone call introduction that bring your candidacy to life. Because it's so easy as a hiring manager to just see a piece of paper and go, oh, fits or doesn't fit. But I would say try and bring yourself to life as a real person who has real value and real passion and enthusiasm. And I think that'll change the dialogue, if you will, about that. I hope so, but it's a big problem.
Yeah. Well, and when you talk about the brag book idea, I mean, are you thinking of, having someone create, information on their LinkedIn profile, on a website, knowing that most people don't have the option to submit additional materials aside from a resume and maybe a cover letter? What kind of a format would you see people submitting that in?
I would submit it, I would just assemble it as a collection of PDF documents that you would only, I would only use it to email out for specific opportunities.
Okay.
But it's not all that difficult to try and find the proper work email addresses. There's a free website out there called hunter.io, and it's free. And what you can do is just search companies, and then it'll provide the most relevant email format for employees at that company. So if you use LinkedIn to figure out the name, you can use hunter.io to figure out the email address to then follow up to your application, where you can then provide that brag book that brings your candidacy to life.
That's fantastic. Well, and a follow-up question that someone had too is, what's the best way to get the internal recruiter names for the companies you're interested in? And would you recommend LinkedIn?
I definitely would recommend LinkedIn. I would just do this is on the LinkedIn free version, right? You can just do a search by the company, and then you click the advanced function, and then you can sort by title, and then you can use that Boolean search. So if you've never done a Boolean search before, it's stringing together words that are aligned. So you can do a search that's, talent or recruiter or human resources or HR or TA, right? And then it'll come up with every employee at that company whose title is one of those search terms. So then you could figure out who might be the most important. But what I would tell you is, I know it seems logical to want to approach someone in talent, but think about how many people reach out to talent people all the time. And what a person in talent is trying to do is they're trying to go after and target the people who best align with the search assignment. And they may not kind of prioritize you reaching out to them, but someone who doesn't get a lot of outreach is the line manager who's actually hiring for that position. And if you get on that person, his or her radar, that if you send that brag book and you follow up with an email, they might actually like that sense of urgency and the follow-up and the professionalism that you're showing, because a line manager will just push off the search to their internal talent acquisition team and then consider that it's covered, right? And they won't really inquire what's happening behind the scenes. And as a candidate, if you can find the hiring manager, you're kind of circumventing that process and that black hole that might occur, because it's the recruiter and TA who sees your resume, who is going to see it and go, oh, not a fit, too expensive. Whereas the line manager, their incentive is only to find an individual that helps them accomplish the goal, to either make or save money that they have in their department, where TA is trying to do a little bit more. And I would say try and circumvent TA if possible.
Right, because it's also that hiring manager who desperately needs to hire someone on their team because they're down a person and they need the extra help. So they'll have more of a sense of urgency about it too.
Yes.
Well, and this question, speaks to that. Someone asked, is it seen as too aggressive to reach out to a recruiter or, HR at a company or maybe a hiring manager versus following the process and waiting to see if you make the initial cut?
No, I don't think it's too aggressive at all, especially if you're in any sort of leadership or sales. If you're going for a sales position, I would tell you that's the hallmark of a good salesperson. So if you're in sales and you're asking that question, I say do it. If you're in a different environment, I know it may feel uncomfortable and unnatural, and it feels pushy, but the mechanics of what's happening behind the scenes, as I mentioned, is there's the job posting, hundreds of people are applying, and then they've got to go through that whole screening process. And the more that you can just bring your name to the forefront and spark energy, enthusiasm, who you are as a candidate and why you're a great candidate, and bring it to the forefront, especially via email. Like, email is still the most highest open rate, highest response rate. It's one of the best marketing tools that exist. Use it to your advantage. I know it might feel uncomfortable, but I say do it.
Yeah. Well, and another question that someone had is, are you better off going through a job board for an opportunity or going directly to the company's site?
So I would say they both link back to a candidate application system. So whether it be Taleo or a ADP product, there's many products out there that kind of aggregate all of the sources of candidates going together. Yeah. To answer your question, there's no distinct difference between going to the website and finding the job on a job board. That all comes back together at the same point of review.
Yeah.
The thing that circumvents that is speaking, like verbally, with someone who's internal with talent acquisition, or of course engaging with an executive recruiter who can then bring life to your profile and really sell it, if you will, to someone who I work with as a TA, someone who's in like executive search, is I work with line managers. I don't really work with human resources.
Mm-hmm.
So I get the direct line to the person who has the biggest pain point for hiring in the first place.
Yep. And I guess the thing that I'll add to that too, once upon a time I worked in recruiting, is that, companies don't post all of their open positions on external job boards, kind of similar to why they would engage someone like Ryan, is because they're having a hard time finding talent by only posting on their internal job board, because they have to pay usually to post on external sites. So I always tell people that if they're not seeing a lot of positions that interest them on the external sites, it might be because those positions get plenty of applicants on the internal job boards. So companies are only posting there. So it is worth, like you had said earlier, Ryan, finding those key companies you'd like to work for and really being on top of their internal job boards too, because you're going to see different positions there than you'll see elsewhere.
Yep.
Another question came in, and this talks to the idea of being in touch with people. So as an active job seeker in transition, what is the right frequency to reach out to executive recruiters in your network?
So I don't know if there's a right frequency. I think it really comes down to is, are you engaging? So if it's an external recruiter, let's talk about someone like me, you got to make sure that the person you're engaging with is in that same niche within a niche market. And I would really challenge you to test that to find out, is this recruiter actually playing in my space and thinking that I'm a good a good candidate? Because what you might find is that maybe they're in somewhat of the same space, but maybe trying to explain. If a candidate reaches out to me and they are continuing to follow up with me, it's normally an indication that there's a misalignment between me and the candidate, because I can promise you as an executive search consultant, if you're a placeable candidate within the network of that executive search consultant, you are a walking paycheck, as a candidate. So
yeah.
You're going to need to worry about me reaching out to you, not you reaching out to me. And so that's the first place I would question that. And then, after that, I can't really say there's a specific frequency, but there is a phrase that we talk about in executive search all the time, and it's just time kills deals. And I wouldn't let more than, if you're in process and things are actually moving forward, if you don't hear more than 2 or 3 days and things kind of feel like they've stalled, there's probably a reason for that. So.
And do you find, so if something is stalled, knowing that it sounds like there is a pretty quick turnaround time, I guess from your perspective with colleagues in the industry too, how often are people honest about the reason why it stalled or that this person's out of the running? Because I know feedback I hear from alums all the time is they feel like, they're in process just in general, and then all of a sudden they hear nothing and they're left with no closure. So I guess how much follow-up do you provide, or do you wait for people to reach out and maybe then provide them with some closure?
I'll always provide them a status update of just hey, we had an interview on Tuesday and I haven't heard anything and it's Friday.
Yeah.
My recruiter gut says there might be something wrong there. But again, that's just me. So it's back to some of my earlier slides where I talk about that most searches are done on contingency, meaning that the recruiter is working for free until they do the placement, meaning that it becomes a volume game. I see a lot of recruiter bashing on LinkedIn, and some of it's deserved and some of it's not deserved. But one of the harshest pieces of criticism that often is received is, I never got any feedback. I never heard how things ended. And that is on the recruiter to provide a status update, like as a third-party recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you that sometimes it's completely out of our hands. And one of the reasons why is sometimes these companies are what we call window shopping. They just want to see what's out there to see either one, if they can upgrade talent in their current organization, or they're not really certain what they want to do yet, and thus they maybe activate and engage a couple candidates. No one really blows their hair back, and then they just let it fizzle out, and they never tell the recruiter otherwise, or things like that. So
yeah,
I think that's important as well, like when you engage on a search and you're working with either a recruiter like myself or internal, is to figure out why is that search open in the first place. And there's also a school of thought in executive search where you really only want to work what we call replacement hires. You don't want to work on additive hires because there's no pain for the company to not make the hire. So you really only want to work on searches where there's severe pain because someone has left that position and needs to be in that seat to help solve the company's problem.
Those are good questions to ask right from the beginning. You know, the idea of is this open because the person's left, or is it a new add to staff, new position?
Yeah, and add to staff most of the time is code for we're window shopping to see what's out there.
That's good to know. That's a very good tip. For someone who's never worked with an executive recruiter before, when they find a firm, so they do this Boolean search that you recommend, they find some firms that line up with their niche within a niche, how do you reach out to find a person at that firm? What's the best way to get in touch?
I would say, I get a lot of folks sending me one-to-one messages on LinkedIn. Like, they'll ask to connect with me with a short little blurb like, hey, I'm a VP of manufacturing at a consumer goods company in Connecticut, and I saw your background that you recruit in the space, and I want to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
So as the candidate, they're like, I know that you're in this world, and I want to speak to you. So then just create a dialogue that's specific around that. So LinkedIn is a fabulous tool. Don't not use it.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, and this question I get all the time, and I'm always interested to know your different people's advice. Is LinkedIn Premium worth the cost compared to other avenues that you mentioned? Or does the free version
I think you can there's like stepped versions. There's one that's like $60 a month, one that's $100 a month. I think there might even be one that's like $30 a month.
Yeah, and I think recently I've seen that they've created like a candidate search version versus a sales version. I know that the basic LinkedIn account can really do more than people realize. So I would say
the basic. I run a multi-million-dollar business and do it all from the free version of LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So you can drive so much value from basic LinkedIn. What you get from the paid versions of LinkedIn, they'll give you like some in-mail credits. And what I'll tell you is that you can get the same you can drive the same impact by just adding someone as a connection and writing a quick little 2-3 sentence why you want to connect with them versus sending them like a novel in-mail message that you get with the upgraded version. And quite honestly, I think that most recruiters operate similar to myself, and just, in some ways it's a nominal cost. I wouldn't say don't do it, but I'll tell you that you can get a ton of value just by doing the free one.
Yeah. No, that is a good tip. Well, and someone else asked on the topic of LinkedIn, how do they ask their LinkedIn network for referrals while also being discreet and not wanting their
good question. That's a great
know?
question. That's a really great question. I'll tell you that everyone's looking all the time. If you're not at least generally looking and perusing the market, you're probably not doing yourself the best service that you can as a candidate, because as I used the data at the beginning, companies cannot find talented people. It's why I have a job and why they pay me a fee for my services. So to answer your question is just engage and reach out to people who are in the types of roles that you aspire to, either at a competing company or, I think you'd be surprised if the recommendations that you would receive, like if someone reached out to me, like I was placed at the LucasGroup by a headhunter who just headhunts headhunters, right? So that's an example. And if another person at a search firm reached out to me, I could point them to probably the two best that I was engaged with, who listened to what I was looking for and will point them in the right direction. So no one's going to put anyone on blast. I would sincerely just like reach out to other people and say, I'm looking to be connected with someone who places candidates like yourself. Do you have a recommendation? I bet you would.
That is, well, and again, another LinkedIn question. Since you mentioned video, really bringing people to the forefront, they're wondering, is it really only about video right now, or is there value in posting like a news story relevant to your industry and adding some personal commentary to it? Or is LinkedIn just really trying to push their video right now?
They're trying to push their video, so they're rewarding it the most. So like if you're an active candidate and you have a really great skill set, like if I found myself like looking for a job right now, I would make a video that's like, here's my sales performance for the last 5 years in executive search. Here's the markets that I work within. Here's what I can drive for your business. Here's what I'm passionate about. And people would reach out to me very quickly because I'm like it would go out to a lot of people because the algorithm on LinkedIn amplifies video content the most. So it's not that it doesn't reward you sharing a New York Times article that's applicable to your industry with some valuable insight attached to that. It's just that it doesn't amplify your voice the same way video does.
Gotcha. And it's probably true that, in 2 years, it'll be some other medium that
yeah, they'll change the algorithm, but right now they really want to drive video content, so you'll amplify your voice the most by doing video.
Great. Well, and it's nice too that if you're not comfortable posting your own video, that you can, repost a different video, and that still gets some airtime, it seems like.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Someone else asked, what would you recommend when a company suggests a consulting arrangement for a period of time before making a job offer? So they're trying out the person first.
I would likely, I just had this scenario happen to me, and on a candidate that I was representing to a very large company. And I mean, it's kind of a game of chicken, right? You've got to be comfortable as a candidate to know your value and to walk away from that if that's not what you want. Now, if you want a consulting arrangement, then go for it, right? But if you really want a full-time opportunity, I will tell you that there's no incentive for the company to convert you from a consultant after that. And here's what I would tell you, like this is sales 101, like negotiation 101 is, I think this may not be this person's specific situation, but when you're interviewing with a company, I don't care if you're only interviewing with one company, you got to tell that company that you're interviewing other places. Like you've got to be a hot commodity. And in today's economy, everyone's a hot commodity. So I think you gotta let them know that they could lose you as a result of like not engaging you as a full-time. And the thing about it is like being a full-time employee, everything in the U.S. is at-will employment anyway. So I just think it's like a try before you buy scheme, and there's no incentive for the company once you're on board for you to be converted. It's like the company then holds the negotiating power.
Yeah, that's a good tip. That is a good tip. This is something that you mentioned earlier about being prepared to get a counteroffer from your current employer when you do go out on the job market. And I was listening to another podcast yesterday that was talking about the benefits or downside of accepting that counter offer. Do you have an opinion there on what to do if you get a counter from your current employer?
I mean, I would tell you don't accept it. The reason I would tell you don't accept it is because whatever they offer you is, I won't define the acronym, but it's CYA, right? Cover your blank. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And think about it in this way, and it's often money related. Sometimes it's like work from home flexibility. Title, it can be difficult because of internal equity and like other people at similar positions, but oftentimes it's money is like the easiest lever to pull.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a situation where, let's just imagine you were to resign today and there's a big rollout of a project that's happening in August and they can't afford to lose you until they roll that project out. You know what they'll say to you? They go, well, from now until August, that's, 4 or 5 months. You know what we'll do? We're going to offer her a fat pay rise. We're going to give her a $40K pay rise so that she's like, oh my God, I value her, and she's going to stay on board. We'll keep her on board through August. At the end of the day, our total outlay of cash is like what? 11 grand, 12 grand. That's a drop in the bucket compared to the value she'll drive getting us over the finish line here. And then, what we'll do starting in July is we'll start interviewing and we'll find a candidate with 10 years less of experience for half the cost. And we'll do we'll let her go in September once we get through the project. I mean, I know it sounds very callous, but that happens all the time.
Yeah. And so it sounds like really understanding what it is that you want and why you're looking to leave in the first place.
Yes.
And really thinking critically about that.
Yeah, you've got to do that. It's about total calculus. It's about your role, the company, your work-life balance, where it's located, everything. It's never just about money. In 2018, I placed 42 candidates in 12 months. And I do review of my placements after they're happy and doing well. And I just ask them hey, again, would you make this move? Are you happy? And we ask them the motivating factors for it. And money is never the first thing they say. It's never. It's it's a better company, better work-life balance. It got me closer to home. I'm doing more of the types of projects that I wanted. And then money is in there somewhere because it makes the world go around, but it's never the first thing. But it's often the first thing that gets coughed up in a counteroffer. So does it really address your core reason for moving in the first place? And the answer is often no.
Right. That's good. That's good to think about. Well, and another thing you mentioned earlier was about the sheer volume of resumes that you see on a daily basis. And I know that you're focused on a very specific industry that likes a certain look and feel, but because you have exposure to other industries from your past, I would love to know what stands out to you on a resume. I see all sorts of different styles and formats and colors and black and white. What matters? What makes a difference to you?
I'm a salesperson. I love results. That's what I want to, and I manage a team, right? I want to see results. I see resumes of VPs of manufacturing for Fortune 100 companies, and it's led this initiative, rolled this out, changed XYZ, and I'm that's all good, but I'm I grew top line revenue by 7.85 million. I want reduced cost by 2.7 million. I want increased headcount by 63 employees. To the point of whether you're a coordinator or you're the CEO in a company, people hire people in their company to do one of two things: to make money or to save money. And you've got to paint that picture for people because, people love talking about themselves and they can get verbose, but they can lose the punchiness and the impact on their resume. And what I urge candidates to do is to bring it back to what value did you drive to the company and what did that mean for the top or the bottom line? Even if it may not be so specific, if you're in, I don't know, even if you're in graphic design, right? It might be difficult to say, oh, this project delivered X, Y, Z. But in some ways, you can try and draw that out. Like, I worked in Adobe Photoshop to do these types of deliverables. I was responsible to execute X amount, like a specific number, which led to this happening with the account I was assigned to, or something of that nature. Like, the more that you can just paint the picture and not be so amorphous, the better.
Yep, that's great. Yeah. Well, and that looks like it's the end of the questions that have come in, and I know we're over time, so I appreciate everyone who's held on with us. And Ryan, I thank you so much for sharing all of your time and knowledge. It's really fascinating to me to get an inside look into the world of executive search and understand really what happens behind the scenes. And I know I feel much more equipped to tell people exactly how to partner with an executive recruiter to really make the most out of that relationship. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
For anyone who might have follow-up questions with Ryan, I'm happy to share contact information after the webinar. So you can email me here at alumnicareers@holycross.edu. I'll also share a recording of this webinar as well as additional information in a follow-up email. So keep an eye out for that in a few days. You'll also receive a short email survey, and please share your feedback with us. That's how I know what great topics to cover and what information to showcase. So please be honest in there. We'll pick up again with more webinars this summer, so keep an eye out for emails from Holy Cross. And thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoy this wonderful spring day wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks.